Start first of all by adjusting your motivation and thinking that you're here in this occasion to listen to those most profound and extensive teachings of the Mahayana. The reason why you are here to receive these teachings is because you keep in your mind always the welfare of sentient beings who have been your mothers in the past and are as vast as the vastness of space. For their sake, you aspire to reach the state of perfect and complete enlightenment, a precious state that is characterized by the full development of all positive qualities and the total elimination of all negativity. With this particular thought in your mind, please adjust your motivation and set your mental attitude.
Oda Gilon Dogam Kinum, Jisoti Dari, Sergeant, Libertola, Naika, Norisha, Kisher Man, Senator, Oda Sonanoja, Ojuda Sanjigo Mara, Santilla, Judan, Dosadan, Hosoji, Chusri, you are Riti, Yunayati, Conga, Sanji Rangamara Sonanoja, Ojuda Tokshu, Jino, Shimjuji, Ojuda Di Goniji, Koranzo Yechi, Yechi, Goning. Juda Sheja Havjadi, Sosu Marju, Yechi of Guni, or Daniel Guachi Mata, or Juda, Sanji, Sijidi Marasoma, Risen, Tijin Center Shini, or Dalenji, or Marisi Mara, or that song you ding.
We talk about the practice of Dharma, but before we engage in any practice or before we start relying on this Dharma, it is very important to always keep in mind the advice that was given by Buddha Shakyamuni himself. Buddha Shakyamuni has proclaimed that whether you are a fully ordained monk, whether you are a scholar, whoever you are out there, before you practice my teachings, it is very important that you examine them. Don't take the teachings at face value just because I say so. So whatever one's status is, if one really has the wish to engage in the practice of Dharma, whether one wishes to engage in the practice of Sutra and Tantra, one needs to follow the advice of Buddha Shakyamuni. First of all, one needs to examine this advice, and after examining it, one can generate conviction in the validity of this advice. Once you are convinced that this is proper advice to follow, then you can start relying on this advice. This is the order of doing things.
Juda Dinasuma in the Juda di Kamni Juda Jilonwarisha Kisher Man Sayan Duna, or you Matomba Tomba Senator. That Matomba Sijudi, Lamsan Timata the Marichi Manemba Jewari, or that Toshu Guni Marju, Toshu Ramba Jigu Marichi Chiwama, Jutoya Jewa and do Matomba Jedi. What you tambo conda, you order, you consola maton, or that you need you Sula maton, narrate consola maton by the tambo, that Sula maton by the Niva, Ojuda Deni Tondona Matumba di Samba, Oda Deni Javadi, Orita Deni Namshida Shinjin on it, Nabrishiva took to Zonrisha, Yerted on the Zona, then Namshida Matumba di Jessanjang.
And when we talk about the need to examine the teachings, as we go through that, we need to rely on we need to understand what is called the 4 reliances, the things that we need to rely upon and the things that we should not rely upon. And the more we go through this process of examination, the more we can be convinced about the validity of these teachings. So first of all, let's look at the 4 things that we should not rely upon. The advice of the Buddha is that we should not rely on the person. The second advice is that we should not rely on the mere words of the person. The third advice is that we should not rely on the interpretative meaning of these words. And the fourth one is that we should not rely on mistaken awareness, ordinary awareness.
Teniga ma dogni shua yena ojuda ju de dans de marsang ya tongi go tomba o kanzo de la kanzo de jinsen de shini mari chi ji yo maris da kari chi ji go resenati sans jaga go chuti dans la mar tachu jin ton de la tongo go rese de ojuda matomba dans ju tomba dans boni dans Oju tomba tambo dans da deni oju da garzugo oda ju tsuri chula tongo go rede shi chu de la yon oju shi chu de la yon ju joshi ko tsula yon ju tsuya ho da nyembo nyengo ko jenja wandawo oju de la yon mari chi ji yo mari ti ton la tongo go re c'est ta matomba chi ko kapte ti tomba di oju da ton la tongo ati yamba da oju da teni ton se je de la ni wari chi dershala kapte di mara gua go che de sanja go tondon se je de la ton ya yo mari ni don la tongo go re se oda ti samba da oda teni da ji karse go ton ya go ji yi chi ya go ji so su lo dan lu ru de la oju da nam shi ji lo dan oju da ti ji so dong wo yi shi ji number shi wo lu ni yo ba no ni nam shi chak ru di yer song ya de la ji karse go zambar song ya yo yan du de la yi chi ji yo ma ri oju da tin ji to so dong wo yi ji number shi mara tak shu ji na nam shi chak ru go no ni so di ti yan ba yan du tak shu ji wo oju da yi shi de la tong go go re se ne oda ma tomba je se ne mara ji du jo yo ding.
So by having actually presented the 4 non-reliances, if we reverse that, if we take the opposite of that, we will understand the 4 proper reliances. So let's look at them as pairs, pairs of opposites. The first advice that we had was not to rely on the person. In other words, not to rely just on the teacher, sometimes on the person of the teacher, whether it is a pleasant or unpleasant, an interesting or non-interesting person. Rather, one has to rely on the teachings of the teacher, on the Dharma that is given by this particular teacher. So don't rely on the teacher, rather rely on the Dharma that is taught by this teacher. So the first reliance is to rely on the Dharma. The second, we come in the second pair now, and the advice we got was not to rely on the words, right? We do not have to rely on the words, because at times the words might be pleasant, the words might be unpleasant, and we might have the tendency to always go for the easy and the pleasant ones. But it says when the Dharma is given, it is not really the words that are so important. Rather, one has to rely on the meaning that lies behind these words. So don't rely on the words, rely on the meaning that these words convey. The second reliance is the reliance of meaning. We come to the third pair, and we said that one should not rely on the interpretative meaning. And the reason for that is because according to the needs of different trainees, certain teachings can be given on different occasions. But really all these various teachings can be interpreted in different ways. So we don't rely on the interpretive teachings, right? Rather the interpretive meaning, rather we need to rely on the definitive meaning. So that's the third reliance. And we come to the last one, the fourth one. The advice was given not to rely on ordinary mistaken awareness. Rather, one needs to rely on primordial awareness. Now, it is quite possible that from the different type of consciousness, and especially sense consciousness that we have, that this type of consciousness are actually engaging their object in a mistaken way. So, of course, it would not be appropriate to rely on such a type of consciousness of awareness that is holding an object in a mistaken way. Rather, we need to rely on mental awareness that is engaging the object in a correct way. So the fourth reliance is reliance on primordial awareness.
So there's 6 consciousness and 51 mental factors. So what they rely on, do not rely on other consciousness, rely on the consciousness of the mind.
Oji da dina yamba yendu ji pe di sakti darwi sir jenda songwa na jen ji pe na ji sir zang ra ji yena sir de ya ho yo se na oda di ji me ya ho dang me chu de ya ho de zang la ma tu wa oji da sa wa ji ya dar ya go oji tong sam bu go ni tak ju ji go go re songwa na jen oji da ji ji tong ga re na thong wa ji ngo so tong be ngozum tombi chaji yena ngozum tsemi no ba yomi ti oda ju ngonjir ngusun thaya mingi ge rigla kogjer se gre kogjer de la ni wari jangzi kogjer se je dan chende kogjer se ji ni wa yendu chende kogjer tombi chala yon no ba yomi ti oda deni jangzi kogjer tombi chala no ba yomi ti deni yang chende kogjer tombi chala yon no ba yomi ti tendaga taksho mawo jiwa goni oda shimjig mawo jiwa goni oda jiwa tawa tangde mara rondaw jeba tangde mara jiwa yang gomba gomdi go tangni oda tusam gomsam wajiwa da tendaji mara shimjig ji gogore sangwa de wajiwa da tenda sangjangi.
So the advice of the Buddha was that the teachings should actually be examined the same way that one would examine and analyze gold. And it is said that there are 3 levels of examination that involved in this process. If you were to buy a piece of gold, first of all, you would rub it, then you would burn it, and finally you would cut it to make sure that it is solid, that it is pure gold. So in a similar way, we have to go through 3 different levels of examination before we adopt any, and we accept any type of advice or teachings. Now, first of all, we have to make sure that what we accept as truth does not contradict direct valid cognition. There are certain things that are obvious, they're not hidden phenomena, and their obvious phenomena can be directly examined by valid cognition. Valid cognition can decide whether there is truth in that or not. So the first level of examination would be on the obvious level by utilizing this valid cognition. But we have to go deeper than that, because sometimes we have certain phenomena which are classified as hidden phenomena. And again, within the hidden, we can say that we have the first level of obscurity, but also we have that which is called the very hidden phenomena. And again, with proper type of examination and analysis, we have to go through those different levels, and we have to make sure that whatever we accept to be truth would not contradict neither the obvious nor the 2 levels of the hidden. Continuing like this, one has to first of all listen to these particular teachings. One has to reflect, one has to meditate, and gradually go through all these levels of analysis and process of familiarization with one's mind.
Ojuda dinda yamba yendu, ojuda, numba san jiwa mara, taba dan shoba nyi se je, oda shoba di tsewa meba, ojuda shamba dan nyenji sawa jenji, chanju ji samji zhong, shoba ji yamba yendu, ji samjen sayang rongwa ji yena yang, tela tsewa meba chu ji yendingi, shoba tsewa meba dan tandingi, taba di maran tsenrik dan tandingi, odan tsenrik ko taksho mambu ji na shimjik ji teni jeni, ojuda karisi go tenbimi rawa ji jiyang go yuwa oda jilik ji dan tenwa ji tsenrik ji taksho ji na ngusan tangya yungi ji chang la ojuda chaksak go yuwa yang tenra ma yinba taksho ji guya din tsenrik dan tenna yang ngusan tangya mingi ji la yang mara ji sangji yi ji go 상지 그 롱동 어디다 된다라 때니 말이죠 그와 지라요 전그 답주 자반이 기토야 메딩이 어디다 된다 연바 연두 어디 조반 처음에 받은 던딩이 다바딘 전그던 던딩이고 어디 넘어 상지와 주디 된다 그 지주제인딩
When we talk about the Buddhist Dharma, it is important to look at it from the point of contact as well as from the point of view. In terms of contact, the Buddhist Dharma is the Dharma that is proclaiming the lack of cruelty. So it's a Dharma that is trying to avoid causing harm to others, and this is why there is so much stress in the development of minds of love and compassion and the mind of bodhicitta. The mind of bodhicitta is the one that determines the contact within Buddhism. And then when we look at the view of Buddhism, it is said that the view is actually quite scientific. And we use this term. We say that the view is scientific because we are so much encouraged to engage in analysis, in investigation, to really go into the depth of things. But again, as we're using this term, scientific view, we have to be quite careful and we have to qualify it, because we know that there are certain things, for example, there are certain attitudes within science that certain things that are obvious and they can be measured, then they are accepted as existent. But then there are certain things that are not exactly obvious, such as, for example, the three jewels, the faith in the three jewels, the faith in the speech of the Buddha, and so forth. These are not exactly things that are obvious, that can be measured with scientific methods. Nevertheless, from our side, we need to generate this faith and this respect towards those things. So this use of the scientific view, this term scientific, goes as far as to explain that we engage in analysis in a scientific way. Nevertheless, we do accept the existence of hidden phenomena. They are not obvious and measurable straight from the beginning. So this is how we defined the Buddhist Dharma in terms of contact, which is avoiding causing harm to others, avoiding cruelty, and in terms of view, which is scientific, analytical.
어디다 dinda yamba yendu juda jiga jeshi ka kamnida nomba sanjiwa chudi da tashu nigi chebrde dinda chigdang dendingi oda denida kapsa waba di da karsan shiwa nangja oji da nguwa dang molam ganga ka nangni jirbu nangja di jiga kanda zangbu shiba jiga zangchu molam di yamba yendu jiga nyewa si chen jika nangzen baba kanda zangbu oji da molam tabshaka di dodi parwo chi mara jiga karisi go po na tuyo ba di nang na shangchu sanbi jiga molam ka ramba di trong me ba bamchak molam bamchak trong me ba molam bamchak trong me ba di molam bamchak trong me ba di ji nang wa du jiwo di josha yangzi zaba di oda kanda zangwo choba molam ni da sang shangi wa yendu oji da sang shangi wa yinba chikji.
So having given this as a general preliminary introduction, it is good now to turn our attention to the particular text that we are studying. The text is this particular prayer, which is called the Prayer of the Arya Noble Contact. It is known as the prayer of Samandabhadra, and it is said to be the king among the prayers. We mentioned yesterday that we have a collection at least of 6 volumes in which we have the description of the different activities, practices and aspirations of bodhisattvas, and within that we have a collection of hundreds and thousands of prayers of bodhisattvas. Within this particular collection, of course, we find this prayer, the King of Prayers, Samandabhadra prayer.
Wajida Dinda Yambayandu, the Kazan Yugin Shua Najeri. Oda Kanda Zongo Jobada, Molam de Ton Senda Yugin go to Dan Sangaton and Jersagan to Sarni, Da Jangaton, Musaya de la, Wajida, Janju Zambi, Molam Sejetino, Janju Zamba, Lamji Namza. Sanju Samba, Dan Solam Don Jolam Niva, Mushobo Kapji, Oda Monam Jaya, Chidan, Oda Deni, Sadam Bonis on the Sacho work, Oda Salani, Sanju Samba, Namji, Monam Jaya, Koni, Vayandu, what you the Koni Budi, Monam de Tabala, Mondunda Wodi, Yanok Dungan in Sosabati, and do what you the Carton, Yanok Dungan in Sosabati, Noni. Oda Chinese Satamani Marazon, Tambo, Da Lingo, yes, Re Gosum Dombe Shawasi, Luigi Go, Moga Goiji Gosum Dombe Shawdi, Sholoka Chigdan. What you that any that shout somebody rila, that any Nivadi Luigi Shawdan, or that somebody Iji Shawdan, that Yuvadi, Moka Shawdi, or that you Sholoka Yudi, that Garasigo, that Carton Sansambachi.
Right, so yesterday we started by looking at the first parts of the text, and in the preliminary parts of the text we find the explanation of the meaning of the name of the text, translators' homage, and so forth. And after that we come into the actual part of the text. As we say, this particular prayer can be, the main body of the prayer can be divided in two parts. The first part is actually dealing with the aspirations of bodhisattvas who are still on the path of accumulation and preparation. And the combination, let's say, of these two paths is described as abiding at the ground of resolute activities. And from that point onwards, from the path of seeing, we have bodhisattvas who are abiding on the path, and that indicates that on the grounds, that indicates from the first to the 10th ground. Now, prior to looking at any one of those practices, it is important to deal with the preliminaries. And here the preliminaries are the 7-limb prayer. By offering this, we amass together the accumulation. And from the 7-limb prayer, the first practice is the practice of offering prostration. The first 4 verses of our text are dealing with that. The first verse is actually presenting a way of prostrating with body, speech, and mind combined together. And then on the second verse, we have the physical prostration. On the third verse, we have the mental prostration. And on the fourth verse, we had the presentation of the verbal prostration. This is how much it has been presented yesterday.
यहाँ तेली दुआ ये ना मर्जी सारा दे देना लोपी थर्मो जरवा दां और दां गुओ तबा सामदी लुगे चाविंदी वार वाती ना ये बायंदु ते संग नानी मरा ने चांचाओ से जेदी तू साला भाबे चावदी लुजी सेदान्या ब दर्जी ट्रांदान्या ब दां कुली जरवे जरवी और जिगे चिवादा या गती शांत सरवा ये ना तीन रागन भाइयों समझी में चेबन दो राने मरा सांजांगी और दा तीन रागन यहाँ जिगे शांत संबोला यहाँ कितने रागो चेबरा माबूची युद्धिंगी.
Now, we mentioned that the first practice is the practice of prostrating towards the objects of refuge, but again, within prostration, we need to understand that we have different types. And actually, the prostrations are categorized according to the length. You can do a full-length prostration where your body touches the ground and you stretch, completely stretch out your body. You can do what is called the prostration where 5 points of the body are touching the ground, or you can do the most condensed prostration where basically you are putting your hands, the palm of the hands together, and you're bowing with your head. Now, there is difference in the amount of merit that one accumulates through these prostrations. It is said that with the first type, which is where your body is fully extended, you accumulate as much merit to be reborn as a universal monarch for as many times as the atoms that are covered by your fully stretched body.
Ojida dina yimba yendu da chulu ga je oda da ti ngo de song ni da yanlo dang no ni dong bu chang zar yanlo de song oda de ni yuan chuban ber yanlo de ngu yuan dan chuban ber yanlo de la yang khang ni song ne la na yu ben chuba dang la na me ben chuba khang ni si la na yu ben chuba de oda zaba rong ne me dao dan ban chong wa dan ba dang su nian nam dang chuba ding jo dang ma min jo dang de bi dan ba je ba de dao la ne chuba je 나저 담반한 단저도 지마 버마 러르냐바도 고비 제브람 본서 건지 제바 디다가라는 초벌의 여세네다 어지다 출루가 니와 연두 지 라나 요번 초바세 지디 라나 요바다 메부던데 가르르세나 어거라나 메번 초바디 지 가르세고 가르 트나 엄마티 트바라 원토딩이고 어지단 초바세 지대요 지 무슨 현현소도 소이나 무슨 샴빈 초바다 예지트번 초바니 상하고 요아리 어다때다 찬자바 동부라나 요번 초바세 지디 무슨 샴빈 초바인딩이 어거라나 메번 초바세 지디 예지트번 초바 예지트 마타브나요 예지 무아지원 초바 어다 딘라 임바 연두 어지다 동부 지다 무슨 샴빈 초바데라 베나지 메다건 초바 어지다 설년건 초바 드비건 초바 다 드드다 잔센라 소벤 초바 마미건 초바 어지다 데다거 르당 양지 마라 가르세고 나자거 르당 어다트 정부 르당 시마 브마거 르당 어다 딘다지 마른 초바 르 mambu고 고닌 초바 어다 딘다 건가상소 유딩이
We come now to the second practice of the seven limb prayer, which is that of presenting the offerings. Offerings actually are again categorized in two types. We have the surpassable and then we have the unsurpassable offerings. Surpassable offerings are presented on verses 5 and 6 and the unsurpassable offerings are presented on verse 7. The difference between those is the difference that exists between what is called the actually arranged offerings and those that are mentally created, mentally emanated. The surpassable offerings are actual offerings that are physically arranged. But as for the unsurpassable offerings are offerings that are mentally created, mentally manifested, emanated. And of course, in order to do something like that, one needs to have certain power over one's mind and the act of emanating such offerings. In the case of the mentally created offerings, they're either emanated or one is resolute that is emanating such offerings. So let's look at the first category, which are the surpassable offerings. It says, with immaculate flowers and immaculate garlands, symbols, perfumed ointments, supreme parasols, as well as supreme butter lamps and immaculate incense, I make offerings to all these conquerors. By arranging immaculate garments and supreme smells, and pounded incense as high as the supreme mountain Meru, in a formation which is superior and supreme in every aspect, I make offerings to these conquerors. So you see, we have the list here of some of those actual offerings, anything from flowers, from symbols, from perfume. We have parasols, we have butter lamps, we also have garments, we have powdered incense, we have smell and different types of anointments. So all of them are actually presented, actually arranged.
어디 다딘다 임바연도 다지 가르세고 zambujo mara tsu rang ji ngusan la ji menchen ji chimbu yo ma ro oda tin no ji ji shuna ma to yang rwa yo ri tin rwa de ti kang ga nong ji na ti so ge yang ya ma de da ji zambujo mo lam ge di da khar chang ma si ge da ti ren da chang ni de nyama sa ma da me ya yin du ti no la za go go yo yin du o ji da ri ni shuna yang khar chang je la ma de yang ma ra ji kar se go Shamaji Disus Odaji Nyansamraji Matayua Marvati, Yanji and Trujan Lejaguari, that Sanjoko Molam de on Trujaguna, Tikanga Trujakajina to come in the Gatinda and do what you there, Frozen Jishua did in Dragon.
Rinpoche would like to explain that, of course, we have a commentary on the King of Prayers, but you need to understand that if we were to stop on every verse and give a detailed explanation, it would not be enough time to actually complete the presentation of these texts. We started yesterday, we have to do it today's sessions and tomorrow's sessions, so it's not a huge time, and if the aim is to actually complete the presentation of the text, you have to understand that we cannot spend too much time on each one of the verses. Otherwise, we will end up in a situation like the Uttara Tantra, right? With Uttara Tantra, Rinpoche decided to give a detailed explanation, but that, of course, means that we will not complete, we will not go very far, let alone complete, we will not go very far into the first chapter. Rinpoche thought that it would be good. The aim with the King of Prayers is actually to complete the presentation, so it will be a little bit faster.
Pola Peduna Jida, Kunin Tombu in Bayandu, Chumambu Sanyago Tisora, you are Marua, what you get any Garasego, take up the Mari. Dayon she Jansen, the Marajuda, Java Comtain Japan, Javan Jabber Jamsu, Mara Yondan Nanguari, da take up the Matu, Captain Yansari. Or that they need Lamanchobi Marataji, Mara Shiva in Sarwa, or da Lamanchobi da Karasco Syndicalism go non Maraji, Christians on some Bancho, Java Judi on the Shi Jansen, that in the Senate, or you that on your road to GT, then you Kongala Marion, the Shi Jansen, or then Lamanchobi Marataji go when this issue. They sure capsule, or you da Lamanchobi, Jiva Shiva. Davachigni, Luchikarana Marashina, Tanda Thomaso Jivaris, Dranjina, Davatila Mar Jiguris, Duajina, Dava some Rana Marshu Guguris, what you daddy, Churana, Tisoiva Mariko, Tisoiva Maris, what that is on the Tani Lamanchabi Veni, Deton Yermes, Jitsuchi Bodi, Yamacho Jila, Marsono Aglu Jiva, or the Jivajinatino in Yagati, Yoya Marva.
The Rinpoche says, I'll give you actually a little anecdote to give you an idea of what happens with the teachings and what happens when you have limitations with the time for giving those teachings. There was one particular great scholar and Lama, our Dorje, who traveled to Tibet, and his reason for going to Tibet was because he wanted to receive a commentary on Lama Chöpa. This actually happened at the time of the 8th Dalai Lama, and he approached, of course, he went to Tibet with the sole purpose of receiving this commentary, and he requested the commentary. And of course the answer that came back to you is that you're a very important person, you are very busy. Myself, I am also very busy. So you have to understand, if I were to give you a complete commentary of Lama Chöpa, that would take 12 months, means one whole year. If I were to give you, let's say, a medium-sized commentary, we would be here at least for 6 months. The shortest I could give you would take us 3 months. Now, none of us has this time. So instead of giving you an explanation of the whole Lama Chöpa, the explanation was condensed down into this particular verse that talks about the undifferentiable bliss and empty. And on this particular verse, there was a commentary that was given for 18 days. So that gives you an idea of how long and how short sometimes these commentaries can be.
Chuba Conavami Jachivasi, or that is on Yadi, Dandana, Drivago Mara, Sansa Zamna, Oji Zenter down Tingen and Jin Tashan the Chivisan Jusambanam Jin Choba Lana Mibadi, or that Zenter down Tingen and Gomaran Tayo, Migo, Riku, Iji, Travas, Jidi, Tindago, Terzawa, and Chobadi, Marji, Samlu Yala Marji, and Chi Sharmatuji, or you that Tinda Yamba Yandu, or you that Contarjan, Carton Shiva Noja. Ji Shawayana Pong Major Den, Chobayana Pong Major Den going on it. Ji Mazuli Tambo, Pong Major Den, Jetava and the Marcelona, you are married, Mua Yishi, Jeti, Lee Tambo, Kamni, Mua did on the San Tombola Nivadan, or you does Sanjino Sanju Samba Mara, Tumo Javadi, Shend Judge, you read it on Chandravaju, Samlu Joni, Muajin and Chobajinati, or you that Judge Muji and Bayandu, or that in Ragagoni, you then in Kamna, you in Chobaru, when I do Jamso Chambola, and you on Jabgan Chobala, that Jamso Chambodi, Marion Jabgan Choba, Jachambo, you are then I don't you then in Kamna Yoba, Metakan Choba, or you that the nearer of unconscious of Yeta, you Zongo, you say Conga, you Muna, you then Choba, Lana Meben Choba ending.
Now we come to the next type of offerings, which are described as being unsurpassable offerings, presented on number 7, verse number 7. Vast unsurpassable offerings I imagine for all conquerors. Through the strength of faith in the noble contact, I prostrate and offer to all the conquerors. And in this point, our commentary says that these unsurpassable vast offerings are created through the might of miracles and concentration that bodhisattvas have. And they actually have the power to make such vast offerings. We mentioned yesterday in the case of offering their prostrations that it's very important to always conjoin these practices with the four countless aspects. Now, an ordinary being would have a bit of difficulty even getting the four countless aspects together and conjoining this with their practice. Nevertheless, one has to use one's power of resolution, one's power of imagination, and think that I am not a bodhisattva, I'm not a Buddha, I'm not an Arya being. Maybe I cannot do this practice perfectly as they would do according to their powers, but at least I'm trying my best. I'm visualizing as much as I can from this. So I think that I visualize that I do it as well as they can do. Now, in the case of unsurpassable offerings, we say that exactly those beings who have gained control of this type of offerings, of powers, they can make vast offerings. So they can offer, let's say, the oceans of this world. That's a vast amount of water to offer. They can offer all the flowers that exist in worldly existence, in all the realms of worldly existence. They can offer all the mountains, all the formations that we have, and so forth. So this is the idea of those vast, unsurpassable offerings.
Wajida dinner in Bayandu, Zombushola, Debi Toda Gos, Wajida Jirdan Deba Sejidi, Rula, Debala, Samuarva, Tommy Deba, Mondo J Deba, Oda Ichi Deba, Samuva Yandu, Oyan, you Sanjina Sanjo Samba, Namji, Dingen and Monamjin T, in Turban Chobasij Dela, Wajida, Samji Machaba, Yet Yamochiago, Yet Tongachiago, Tommy Deba. Or you that the lama you chigo deba sejudi oda tendra chide marji mazuli tambovi you are married tendra go Zender go to ding de la tendra go or you tria di taba mebaji you are di mara dendema non rupa ichigo goni then chacho re samle deba di ichigo deba mondogo deba sejudi tendra go you and your turban choba tendra chi mara tria la or you sosola Tindago want to buy Namsina Yong Sena, or that it Tigoni Deba, Monduji Deba, and do Deba Sambu Gonida, or then Chobatas of Bugumi.
Now, when we actually make these particular types of offerings, these offerings have to be presented with faith. And when we talk about faith, we need to keep in mind that there are 3 different types of faith. First of all, we have what is called the clear or lucid faith. The second one is the second one is the faith of aspirational faith, and the third one is the faith of conviction. Now, with we should generate all these three types of faith when we are presenting these offerings. This is why it says here, through the strength of faith in this noble contact, I'm making this offering. So we should have this faith that sentient beings that are more advanced, they have this power, the power of miracles, the power of concentration, and so forth.
Wajida dinda yamba yendu da yanlo danga nani odan choba khoni wa yendu niwa da choba yanlo di da di traji wajida dinda yamba yendu da yanlo dambo di sar duyona wajida sok drubjang si wajida so jong sang yang guyari wajida so sidina sonam sagya wajida sonam da ishi jin sok sagya wajida choba yanlo danga nani oda shaba matawa yen tubodi dan saksoya go choba yindingi dwa yang go ridi so wo ji dan tanjen tambe chen dwa yindingi molam ta so dwa go japchun da wo delan tambe chen yindingi oji molam ta so dwa la varde choba go di dwa di mara shapu pambondi go ni shaba jiwa yana oji da ji molam dwa dela varde choba oda go da wo di ji digdo da oda tinda go ji yuwa yendu non-tru ka lingo yasam go ni ji non-tru ji jaga di barchu ji ga yuwa ruwa tinda yamba yendu oda shabu yanlo di dwa jang ya yinding.
Now, up to here, we have presented the first two of the 7 limb prayers, which is the prostrations and the presentation of the offerings. Following that, we have the third one, which is confession of negativity. Now, remember that the heading of this particular part is accumulation and purification. So there are actually 2 purposes. We're doing this 7 limb prayer for 2 purposes. But from all these 7 different practices, it is actually the confession of negativity that acts as a purifying agent. The previous, or the remaining parts, the remaining practices, are practices for putting together what is called the conducive conditions for our practice. But in the case of purification, we need to understand that there are some opposing conditions for our practice, inconducive conditions, and these need to be removed. They need to be purified. And it is quite possible that the mistakes that we have created with our body, with our speech, with our mind, are actually creating problems. They are blocking this prayer, our wishes, our aspirations for becoming true. So it's important to engage in the process of confession and purification.
Oji da dinda yamba yendu jinga su mara ji da mitaka shenka yena mara tseka shenka yena ti nangla ti sondi tamna chiya de la oji da garchen dang tanchen ni warwan tamba chen de oji da chila dang tushir so yendingi garwe chen de garchen go barchu jingi di ti nangla do dang sagma dang therma la sabayo na dambu to so mebar so gwa pe ti nang je yana dang na ni oda shapo yana de 지가 랑제라 상주 선바마 상남당 졸람나니버 갑고 모람 자야 오다 상주 선바 살라니버 사동보니 조월 그 상주 선바 남지 모람 자야 상주 선바 젬보니기 남지 모람 자야 디 강가 디 제마지전데 말 랑고 모람 자바이나 딘르야라 와르데 조버 오단 탄첸 석서바다 거친 지 드와장야 니요버나니다 거친 드와장야 디 도나 성만로 메버조야디 샤바인두 단다나 삼바 샤바야로 디 사바나 도저저던 때무용거니 리당어던 디전 얘기죠. 디바다 그 지와진지 대다고 담지 덕고 소소를 샤와스지 쇼로가 찌디인딩 오다디 지 샤바스지디 다 룽어 예섬거 고니 논트 건지와디 오지 논트 건지와디라 오지다 지 랑진지 카나마도와스지 랑장거 첨라지 메나 디반도딩이 양지 지 퀴랑장이거 오지다 가르스고 गोनी मर तेदा घर दिवा तेला तोवा से हम गयोरी ओदा को तरजा ओदा नोंटर को जीवाती नोंटर को सवन रवोती रण सोसु जग ओदा दोचौरी चिरदौरी तमगदी तिगसम को हंग सोसोला रव में पर तिगसम को हंग लुगो गोनी नोंटर जी ngog गोनी नोंटर जी इजी गोनी नोंटर को जीवाती तिंडा को दिवा तो मर जी सरवा येना मामो बना तिंडा को दिवा जी चेंजर येना तंदर जी जंबा येना ती तामजी दक सोसो नि मर what you do conscious on no young Josem down, Shinchi, Maramashi, but Domsem, what that did Gonishabaji gooding.
Now, Rinpoche was making the analogy saying that whether you want to cultivate a field in order to have a crop or whether you want to prepare your flower garden, you always know that there are some conditions that are conducive for growth and there are some other conditions that are non-conducive. So things such as a good quality of earth, the water and the fertilizer are conducive conditions and you need to accumulate those, you need to apply those. But then again, there are things such as, let's say, stones or roots of old plants, or you could have some thorny bushes and so forth. And these things definitely do not allow your flowers to grow as they should. So these are the non-conducive conditions, and they all need to be removed. So we need to act here in a similar way. We need to accumulate certain things, and we need to remove things that are opposing the actualization of this practice. And as we say, these are the prayers, these are the aspirations that are done by bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation. They're also done at the level of bodhisattvas who are abiding on the first up all the way up to the 10th ground. But in order for all these prayers to be actualized, the non-conducive conditions have to be removed, and this removal happens through the process of purification. So we see here through the verse number 8, which deals with the confession of negativity. It says, whatever negativities exist, and I have done with my body, speech, and similarly with my mind, due to the power of attachment, hatred, and confusion, I confess all of them individually. So as we say, it is quite possible that we are engaging in mistaken actions, physical, verbal, and mental ones, and those things need to be confessed. We need to confess what is called the naturally unconfessed negativity, and that we have done in the past, this that we are doing right now, and this that we have the tendency and will probably also do in the future. So we need to recognize that. We need to we also need to make sure that we restrain the mind by making the promise not to engage in these activities in the past. We need to apply the antidote, and we need to rely on the proper method.
What you did by ending Maramagi, you go to Digo when I Chanzaravan, Chuchin Shabadan Siji, Second Tambunanga, was there and Tambusum with it. But that they need to con Yuvati, Gisa Yaron, deny on some Yua and do Gisa Yaronga and over the what I Savaron, Shoti Javakan on Sanji, Ranjanam, Lobdom Malod, Davakan Jisonakana, the Dokanji is a dog Yaron. What you that Gisa Yaron said you did, you that giver. Lawyer the giver, wrong giver, the Mumagiva, the wrong giver, Gosumji giver, Chisamba, Mama Bana changer, that there Chisamba, what that younger young you give Sanjin is on it, you done the Nakansa Mass on you are, so Java Kanasi Seduna, so Janajiba Java Kanasi, Kansa Tambo, or that Sanji sees the Duna Sanju Samba. The near Ranger Namdan, Hobdan Seduna, Ranger Musatin, Nyantu de Chila Temple Goni Nieron, or Jil Hoa Namdan, or Dal Hoa Namdan, Deacons of Sambadija, then Nieron Malova Namdecons of Javadija, or that they need the Judat Tabasam Consodino or Tondi Varua, then Tamadi, Dan Duarudusan and Yen Sayana on Ju, Luigi Goni Marji, give a Shavaji. Goni give a Shavaji, Iji Goni give a Shavadan Jiva, T. Congago Konzong, we give a tea, or that Gavala Asi, Jisa Yeron Siji, Gava Gumbati in Guivarua. What you that in Rayan Bay and do, what you did Gumba Yena, T. Ready, Margiva, T. Rondon, give a Kalari Tokyo Ding.
We have already explained the prostration, the presentation of offerings, the confession of negativity, and we now come into the next part, which is rejoicing. It says, I rejoice in all the virtue of all conquerors of the 10 directions and that of the sons of the Buddhas, that of solitary realizers, learners and non-learners, and in the merit of all migrators. When we rejoice, it is very important to rejoice, first of all, in our own virtue that we have created in the past, that we are creating right now, and that we will create in the future. But of course, it is quite important to also direct our attention towards the vast amount of virtue that is created by other beings who are much more developed than ourselves. And here the text mentions, of course, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, solitary realizers, learners and non-learners. So as a matter of fact, we can see that we have 5 categories of beings who are creating virtue, and we need to bring all these 5 categories of virtue into our minds in order to rejoice. First of all, we have the Buddhas. Secondly, we have the Bodhisattvas. Thirdly, the text mentions Pratyeka Buddhas, solitary realizers, and it makes a distinction between those who are learners and those who are non-learners. And finally, the text mentions ordinary beings. And when we come into this category, Rinpoche was saying, you have to bring into your mind all types of beings that fall into the 6 types of migrations. Whatever type of virtue, no matter how small or big they create with their body, with their speech, their mind, all this needs to be mentally reflected, and on the basis of that one needs to rejoice.
oda sanji tamchi sangyongwari jite samji domi dan da sanji dan oda sanji nam oda ji karis go shang ji ran ba sanji ma chang ni yesu di oji ramji mara ji zab shang ji go kong to ding yi oda din da ge ru ma chang ni yesu di na 지금 쳔바당 사바당 제지와당 쳔부 추라 지 척탁 망가가 마쳐서도 척바당 타바 망이와 된다 니딩 이건 공부되다가 어디 덕루 들지 장당냐베 고니 루 들지 장당냐베 무 고니 어디다 주진 사바당 제지와 주진 걸로 거라고 나와서 티 꼴바당 지라 섬제 강가란 팬디 연구이 와라 어디 돈다가 추성으로 나와서 하디 어디 중으로 그러고 연구인데
The next one is the act of urging the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma. Number verse reads, all those who are the bhikkhus of the world in the 10 directions, those who have found Buddhahood without attachment, in the stages of enlightenment, all those protectors, I urge to turn the unsurpassable wheel of Dharma. So we see that here again we are addressing all of the Buddhas of the 10 directions that act like a lamp, a bright lamp, like beacons in this world. And it says, I'm requesting all of those who have found enlightenment gradually in stages, those who have found the state of Buddhahood and they are free of attachment, they are free from any obscurations. They have found this particular type of comprehension free of attachment and free of impediment. I request all of them to turn the wheel of Dharma, to give an explanation of the subtle and in a way that it goes deep into the Dharma, but also it is expansive. And of course this request is because if the Buddhas turn the wheel of Dharma and teach, there will be great benefit for sentient beings.
Oji da dina yimba yinda yana danga nani oda chung ri oji da ngaba chunguru kurwa yana di tro da ti akko yana tuba oji da nyangane manda suran de yana yimba yindu di savana nyangen da ton konji de da ruwa kana benjan di kurwa chengu da ni ji ba yon da ko tharmo ra bi surwa jose oji da shau chena ji oji sanji da so kanga or Jangani Marandavar Jidding, Tindra, Yungigo, Tindra, Yuayan, or Jida, Dirty lead on Sonamebo, Toko, Tindra, Yuayan, Marju, Sosu, Dirty Trondan Yamba, Turdi, and Rua Kongala, Nikab on Tartik and Pemba Deviago, Cheto Kara Jamsu, or the Yangani Mandava Marajiro, Senoda, Tanju Puyan, the Indian.
We come to the next practice, which is the practice of requesting and praying the teachers not to pass into paranirvana. The root text, as appearing in the verse 11, reads, "To those wishing to demonstrate paranirvana, I pray with my palms joined together. For the benefit and happiness of all migrators, please remain for as many eons as there are atoms in the fields." So you can see here again that the request is that once one understands that it is possible that some of the teachers, some of the Buddhas are having the wish to demonstrate passing into paranirvana, again for the sake of benefiting sentient beings, one requests all of them to have a very long and stable life, requests them to remain in this world and to remain for the length of their long life is described to be for as many eons as there are atoms in this world. This is the request.
Dati Chandravadan, Dumdrabu Javati, Tony Shujavari, or the Chandravadan Chujin Jaban, Gizu, and Okrina, Giva John the Dokijava, and Jizabi Janju Chamber, Mo Sena, or you down Yano Dambo Chantravani Zondi, or you die Yano Tupu, Yano Tuku Mara, give us a Shisamba, Mamabana Shinju, Tatara Shijamba, Chivati, Gisa Konga, Dua some Jenam Kadanya, but some Jen Tamji, Sanji Toyago Chetan, Tamongo, Ron Chigo Mayamba, Raja some Jen Tamjigo, Nikab Don Tartigo, Gubak Meberzoyadon, Shidi Dua, Sanjigo Komotoyago Chet, Mobayan, Senator Mobayan of this one.
Now we come to the last part, which is actually the dedication. You can find this in verse 12, where you can see that all the previous practices are summarized. It says, "Whatever little virtue I have accumulated through prostrating, making offerings, confessing, rejoicing, urging, and praying, I dedicate them all towards enlightenment." So at this point, we're just mentioning very quickly all the type of practices that have happened up to now. And we say that whatever virtue one has accumulated, one needs to dedicate. Of course, one does not dedicate just for oneself, but rather one dedicates towards the well-being of all sentient beings. Not just one dedicates so that not only temporary, but also ultimate suffering of sentient beings is completely eradicated, and so that not only temporary, but also ultimate happiness is established for every sentient being. So it's all dedicated towards the state of enlightenment.
Oji dadi na yamba yendu dadi yugi ngoni da karzwan jiga sabji shuwa nangya. Oji da zombo choba molam di shangjiba samba maran tsawjo la niwa, mushu la niwa shangjiba sambi molam tabya chigdang. Sala niwa shangjiba sambi molam tabya nidi molam go nguji yendingi. Dadi molam go nguji di ndabya la oji tanjian tsawsaw ya dang, garjian dhruva jangya di yanlo dangu goni. Yamba yendu oji da tindragon tsawsaw Sabadi Mundunda with Serdang. That in English, the what you da Shanju Sambi Monam Jaga de la Dandanaki Warwa. To Muachab Sasdina Shanju Samban Solamba, Jolambu Kaka, Monam Naya, Tin Yamnagar Bati Danjava, Chidang. That the new Satamon is on the Sacho or Salani with Shanju Sambanamji, Monam Jaga, the Tin Nipuding Vijay, Tin Niput, that is Juguni Monam Yelai. Ojida Molam de Patsisi Jivari, Oda, that is a modding Vijay, that is Juguni, Molam Yella, she was a Tinago, Shanju Zambanam, Molam Dadan, the Tabadi, the Raji Tam the Gandu, some Jimachapa, Rendus and Attila Yichiji, 我觉得他几个当地学员呢也几个对吧当，嘛点这个莫那个莫那个你话点这边的，让你忙我把那讲过的上面我都当，我在这里也几个对吧，甚至过年，我在几个有个人都，我在你如果在那莫那也来学员朋友当，我在莫那个车店东北朋友你的，在一年样个有啊的，但我觉得我觉得等待学员呢也。我在木鱼学不，木鱼学不，像就三百南几，莫南几人把伢子来呀，激动，像三泡泡，像三泡泡，萨拉尼瓦南几莫南几人朋友，我在跌倒，莫南几这边的什么有不哪里，当不木鱼学不，像就三百，操就拉你个像就三百，我在莫南的伢子来把跌了，样就十几门这边接有啊的，但接那个，但人人你学不够啊，接那个当不的。三百那边到白讲话是就电影的啦样那是个，我觉得什么也不能的，当不长期了，就讲公办样子做吧，长期了也让确保经济，长期那就投这个投工的样子做下的，莫那么的搞的是那。
No. So what we have done up to now, we have completed the first part of the text. The first part of the text deals with preliminary activities. And you remember we said that these preliminary activities, they're dealing with accumulation and purification. And basically it was the practice of the seven-limb prayer. Once this first part of the prayer has been presented, one can move into the actual part of the prayer. The actual body of the prayer is dealing with what is called the actual practices of the Bodhisattva prayers. And these are seen in two different levels. First of all, we are examining practices and prayers, aspirations of Bodhisattvas who are still on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. This appears in the text under the term ground of resolute contact. And then following that, the text presents the prayers and the aspirations that are done by bodhisattvas who have entered the Arya path. So it presents prayers and practices of bodhisattvas from the first ground all the way up to the 10th ground. And following that, the text presents the measure of having established the result of this prayer. Now, as you can see, number 2, with capital headings, it says the actual practices of the Bodhisattva prayer. It has 3. First of all, practicing the prayer on the ground of resolute contact. Number 2, practicing the prayer on the ground of the Arya Bodhisattvas. And number 3, the measure of the established result of the prayer. Once this part is completed, at the end we actually have the presentation of the benefits of having paid attention, or having committed this prayer into mind. And it is very important again to keep in mind that this prayer needs to be done with a certain amount of faith. We mentioned that there are 3 types of faith, and it is very important that all these 3 types of faith, and in particular convictional faith, is engaged when one is making this prayer and have these aspirations. Now, coming into the main part of the body, where we will have the actual practices and examining the practices on the ground of resolute contact, we will see that this is broken down into 10 different parts. The first part is purification with pure intention, and this again has 3 subdivisions. The first subdivision is the one making a prayer, having the aspiration to make offerings to the Buddhas, and that the Buddhas thoroughly complete their intention. This is presented on verse 13.
我觉得定着人把人都打定，我如果人把地上打我就我打上就三百，这个我就不算，抽就拿你个上就300那么就我打没那么大，我打他们这个没那么大压力，打这个的个人是呢，你个上就那么大手机，就点到那光线出去，光用嘛就得到人家，300上就人把上机上好些，我这个生活的，我就打几个当地学那样。这个原来等个过年，就打那让个 Lu Long Ju did some give over than you or you that Tindago. December Maragiva Jiva, Mamma Tata Jumbo Giva, the Mamma Bana, Changer Giva, or that is so Conga, or you done December Sanji Jumdinamla, Tindago Gisati Marapua, and the Sanjinamda, or the Sochina Jiva, or you Nitanji, Kamna, Kona Jiva, Dinamla, Pune, or you Pua Gitala, Teni, or Dash on you send back to Molam Tin or you man, and Dravia Chida, or Choja Chisadina, and Dravia Chi, Kayon, my Jones, Edwina, or Jidang Martin, Diva Sanjida, Tatar, Shokina, Jiding, Tatar, Sanjay Chamber, Sanjita, give us about the so pure. That Chamandi, Mamma Banama, and John Jericho, San Janjericho, or you Taba Samji, Lamla Shiba, Lamla Mashiva, Namla Yotita, Gisat, so Puno, or the that Sanji Mara Gumba also Tawada, or that dog Ranjan Ganga, Sanji Tawago G, the Givers and the younger Jirgis and a Monajakudin.
So as we see, we have completed the preliminary practices and we are dealing now with the actual part of the prayer. And in particular, we're looking at practices, aspirations of bodhisattvas who are abide on the ground of resolute contact, meaning practices on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. So we look at this first type of aspiration on verse 13, where it says, May my offerings be made to the Buddhas of the past and to those abiding in every world of the 10 directions, and may those who have not come very quickly complete the intention of enlightenment and gradually come as Buddhas. And we mentioned before through the practice of the 7-limb prayer that we are making extensive offerings to all the Buddhas, and we present everything that we possess, everything that we enjoy, and in particular the root of virtue that we have created over the 3 times. We amass all this together and we offer it to the Buddhas. First of all, we can offer it to the Buddhas that have already come into this world, the Buddhas of the past. We have to visualize that we're offering it to Buddha Shakyamuni. But it is quite important to keep in mind, to have the aspiration and to think that we will continue to always make our offerings and that our offerings will somehow benefit those who have not reached enlightenment yet. So it says, the text says, those who have not yet come. We're making offerings to those beings who perhaps have not entered the path yet, those who have entered the path yet, but they have not reached the state of enlightenment. And may, through the power of our own offerings, may they be able to gradually complete their path without any obscurations, without any delay, and they come into this world as Buddhas as well.
What you did in the Jigdon, that they need the Okadan, you are the Sanji Shen on the John Sambasi. What you done, Duni in a Sanji Shen John, said you did, Tinda Yuarva. Ranya Mamba Namara Sanji Shen Tanaji, Todon, Samadan, Tindagu, Nyamagava, Ridim, and Mebber Jigsen, or you dare Muji Sajan, Tindaji or Jigsen, Shen John, or that they tin on Jungle, Molamdi and Bay and do that in Savannah. Shangji Kali, Shen of Jenny, but Tito Jajri on the Togji, Sanju Shanwa Dons of Java, Sanji Siji of the Congress of Wasina, or Juda, Tachiga, Rango Lunan, to Dism given over Jiva, to some of the Gita, the Zokanga, or Juda, Shamaji, Jitenjin Kamla, then Jitenjin comes in Nula Tonda, or you Gita, Donda, then Nula Punusinanda, Nula Tonga, Poo, Shanlago, Togo, Mamma Bana, Sanjay, Sanji Shen, to Jitenjin come Tamjina, Marji, Yonzo Toba, Shen Toba, Dodon, Samala Soba, Maber Journey, yet the only Jigi Monam Chigdon, or that these under Mazi, Sanji, Shenga, Dirty Dondon, but Shenkam Tamji on Martina, Jingo, Toba Shenkam Tower Churches. Teacher was under Mazi, teach and come go, Vina Yomara, Sanji Bogda Mebaji, Tion, Shanju Samba, Maracarisago, Namka, Mara Corner, or the Shanjuji, Shenga Down in Marachuson, or that Tindago, Jim Cordon, Conrad Jigus, and or the Shenjo Monam de Tabjang.
Now we come to the next part of this particular division of the text, which declares the intention to thoroughly purify Buddha fields, and it has to do with purifying the environment. And it's a practice that is relevant to us because we also, in the future, when we reach the state of enlightenment, we would also have to establish a pure field together with that. The root text reads as follows: May, however many fields exist in the 10 directions, become vast and completely pure, and may they be filled completely by conquerors who have proceeded to enlightenment under powerful Bodhi trees and by sons of the Buddhas. So, as we said before, it's in the previous verse, what we were doing is that we were offering all our possessions, everything that we experience, everything that we enjoy. We offer the root of our virtue over the 3 times towards the Buddhas, now of the past, present, and future. In this particular verse, what we're doing is rather we offer all this root of virtue towards the environment, so that the environment will be completely purified, that the environment will be cleared for any type of unpleasantness, whether that is in the form of harshness, whether it is in the form of stones, of rocks, of thorns, so that all of this ugliness and roughness will be removed from the environment, and rather that the environment will become completely clean, completely pleasurable, pleasant, pleasurable. It will become almost like a jewel, so pretty and so clean. And as we do that, we visualize that we purify all of the fields that exist within this world. And the text says, as many fields exist in the 10 directions, so there are countless of those fields. May they all be completely purified. And it's not just that we're purifying these fields, but we also visualize that each one of those fields is completely filled by Buddhas, and each Buddha is also accompanied by the entourage of bodhisattvas. So this is the purification, the intention to purify those Buddha fields.
Yob Chichi Samjan Jongadi, Lamla Mashi Gonzo, or Jidadi to this Savandana, Shakti Samjan Gonam, Jenny, but it out of the name Digit. Ruakanji, Chichi Donamna, temperature river on the Parisho was in a Marasoma Yendu, or Jidadi, Chichi Samjana, Jidalamla Mashi. Or you does some jam conga and Ruduka some jam Shokjana Jiba, or does some jam Shokjana Yuba, does some jam conga, some jam conga Yuba, T Tamji, or you done Koran Kurva, or you the Dinger down, you that any Lingambo Maratogan Koran Kurva down, or that lead on your money, young Yomon Dojo down Temuko. Nina Salasaba, or down you Karsigo, Nojo don Temuko, Hongo, Dinger Yadi, or then Nasaga Nardiva Nojan and Bayandu, Gumbu Jambiti Son Yuarva, Nino Shisha, Niji Jena Ponchala Asi, or you that Dinger Shiva Chasadina, Cover Dinger Sejiti, Nino Yuari, Zaya Ming, Dati, Dingerka Ninda would this Savati lead on Yomonica to the Ui and do Rovas Jen Conga, Ronga Nasaji, Nikam Na, or that any Majuji, any Tondo Yuarva, or that you don't number them yet, some Maju are the Mar, nothing ego, Nebanda would be, Mazumaratin, Kurvanigo, Samjan Conga, Yamba, and do Kurva Dingerdi, or then Nazana Yamba, and do the out of the Nimi de Judi, Ronki Nazan, Parvaza Mayamba. Lead on Yomongo Hongo, nothing Nasa, or that team Maberjan, she did over Chichisaya, Chidon, or that she did Tovna Yon, Dua Ganga, Chuji don, Muberto Adang, Ilok and Dopa, Don Tamji, Marayavian, the Yomar Shakti, and that in Dagam, Rango Luno, you to some given word on Chiva. Ruduka Samja Tamjila, Parton, Purva, the Molam, the Purva, Shanlavga, Togut, or Judachi Samjan, the Joyaga Molam Javang.
Now, we have said that we see that on verse 14, we're offering the root of virtue that we have accumulated over the 3 times, so that we will purify the environment and will turn the environment into pure fields. But it's also equally important to purify sentient beings who exist in this environment. So if you see, the next part of the text is dealing with purification with a special intention for happiness for all sentient beings. Verse 15 reads, "May, however many sentient beings exist in the 10 directions, be always without sickness, and may they have happiness, and may the Dharma-related purposes and hopes of all migrators be fulfilled accordingly." So here we realize that, of course, the environment, the world is filled by beings that fall into the 6 types of migrators, and most of those, mainly this verse is dealing with beings who have not entered the path yet. It is important that we are equally generous and that we dedicate our virtue towards the happiness of those sentient beings. It is important to understand that as those sentient beings abide within cyclic existence, they will of course experience the shortcomings of cyclic existence, which is various types of suffering. This suffering is actually created through negative karma. The causes of this suffering is this contaminated karma, as well as afflictions, mental afflictions, and in particular the 3 poisons of attachment, hatred, and confusion. It is due to those 3 that the sentient beings experience various types of suffering. And as the protector Maitreya has also said, this suffering is like a sickness, and one needs to understand what is the root, the main cause for this sickness, in order to cure it. So understanding that all types of sentient beings undergo suffering, and understanding that the causes, the roots of that is these contaminated actions and the 3 main poisons, the afflictions, then one generates the wish that sentient beings will be free from their sickness. And the word sickness here does not strictly refer to the actual sickness, disease, but also relates to the experience of suffering. And when we say that they be free of sickness, we also indicate with that they should be free from the causes that bring about this suffering. As this is removed and eliminated, of course, sentient beings are placed in a state of happiness, of peace, the pacification of this suffering. And once their mind is relieved from this suffering, then of course they can direct their attention towards Dharma. They can generate interest there towards Dharma. And this is why the verse continues by saying that may their Dharma-related activities and all their hopes be fulfilled accordingly. So in this case, one is being particularly generous with one's virtue. One offers the virtue of the 3 times so that sentient beings will be released from their suffering, from their sickness, and that they will experience happiness.
Tsenshab Samba Mara Jin Sojuru Muachobosi Molam Damara Don Songo Yuayandu or Jidati Wardo Dachi Tening goes in a zone Karazugo Sanjivala, that Tabachim Mara Sanji Gumi, Tabachim with Sanjivala, Shanju the Semchi Gumi, Shanju the Semchibala, Shanjuko Semgu Judy, Shambadan Yenji Savajenji. Shanju Semchi go away and do Shambadan, or the Yenjis of Maragumgumi. Tila young wonder what you that you in Chuamatawa, and with the Galas of it, or that you children Galam Jiram Batizo, or more than Rogo away and do that, and though are they or you rondons and a Lama Masiva Gonzon and Kurali Truvala, or you Tautambu Gona. Or you da some genam la marshaba don yenji gumiadi or da karchimbo yembatin songu.
Now, it is very important to keep in mind that, of course, those prayers, those aspirations there are done with the ultimate goal of reaching enlightenment within the Great Vehicle. And for that result to be actualized, it is very important that the aspect of the Great Vehicle is generated, and the particular aspect of the Great Vehicle is the mind of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is generated in dependence on its causes, and the causes that bring about the development of such a mind are love and compassion. And before love and compassion are established, it is very important that the individual trains their mind through the practices that are shared with the small and the medium scope of the Lam Rim. So issues such as death and impermanence need to be contemplated prior to that. And once all these steps have happened gradually, once you have trained your mind like this, then you can reach to the point where you can generate this mind of bodhicitta, and you can have this incredible aspiration in order to benefit others. You can say that from that point onwards, you hold the purpose of others as being the main thing in your mind. So it is, keep this into your mind as we've reached in this particular point.
Ojida dina yamba yandu dan di juga na ruwa kanji chuji tonam na thambar jir jir riwa on de parjo so yang duna ojin ruwa sanjen ganga mara chi chi la chi mandamba me pe mara chi rongo ni sagla mara chi chagjen chi ada oji rongla no ba la mara donka ta ya medingi oji rongjen ganga la shamba don nyenji gungungi oji da shamba don nyenji gungu tin thala teni da changjun jagda sem chi gu yuarwa oda thambar jir jir riwa on de parjo se jite tinra chi la jarjang.
When we come to verse 15, where it says, "May the hopes of all migrators be fulfilled accordingly," this particular word, the hopes, needs to be understood that in order to fulfill the hopes of sentient beings, in order to fulfill the purpose of sentient beings, it is very important for one to have first generated the mind of bodhicitta, and prior to that, one needs to have generated the mind of love and compassion. This is how the hopes of all sentient beings can be fulfilled accordingly.
Ojida dina yamba yandu ojida tin dhoni da dini da niwa ojida shangju ji da ji ji tela ji ri tonsen ji yo banang da tambo de sabji sam yo ati to da niwa di shangju ji sem ma ji ba ojida lam la molam de ya de la yang ha yo ri ti tambo de ojida rang go ji jiwa den da jiwa ngama da su ten la ojida ji thaba chembu sem chang thaba chembu sem chi ko sem chi nyong ma nyong da mara samlu da wa takshu ji oji kangan da ji chongwa yin du mara rang li mara yen li ma rang kar chi wa si on du na oda ji thaba chembu sem chi ko pa cha sa ma ja thab mandi oda de yin na ji thaba chembu shangju ji sem chi a go ji sem ngu chi na da mu ji mu ma gu a re de oji da tin ra ga pa cha ja ya go da molam da ya yin ba yin du dana ji wa den jong rab de jong war tom ba si oji da chim ji korwa ni zo ji chamba jong jong la ma ji ne kang ra ma bo ji nyong gu yu a ri oji da de lin chamba da rab de jong wa ni la ji kang ra wo mo nyong go che ba ra yu a ri rab de jong wa yin na rab de jong ja ga yin na ti ten la ji go sam go ma ten sha de ma song gu a go tham ma bo yu a yin du oji da tin ra go cha ni yo kang ra chamba li ma ra kang ra nyong ren do wa da oji da diwa mo ren do wa yin du rab de jong wa ten ti ten de jen thaba chembu chu do ya la tan chen ma bo jin zong gu yu a yin du oda ti mo nam de lan na sa wa na shangju choba tang na dok shu jong do wa kan de chi wa tan ji serab kan de chobu chi wa na tak de dong le rab den jong wa ri so se na da oji da shangju choba se ji ji shangju se du ji thar ti kan du de do wa ma li wa shang ji yong de ma li wa che ba de la shangju se ong ge wa ro wa ji thoba sam ji shangju sam yo wa ri di shangju chen bo di shangji ji kwang phang de yin du dan da gan di shangju choba se ji di oji da di ma wa ba na ti ma ra thoya go ton de ma ji sam lo ta ti che da mo na jab oda chi wa kan de ji kar se go ngar jong sam ba ma ji chim da chim te na ma ka ngar mo bo ji nyo ya di ma tem ba ye na di chen ji ne rab de shang do ko ma to ni ko lu chi go ri te yin du che ba kan de ma che bo ji wa de so ma te ya oji da che ba da rab de shang ji no ni chen ba di rab de shang yon de tem ba go ni da ne du yin de rab de shang wa yong wa sho ho se na mo na tab jang.
Now, we move into the next part, which is actually the path remembering bodhicitta. As you can see, this is actually the second part. If you see the that the practices of the ground of resolute contact has 10 subdivisions. The first one was the purification that had 3 verses 13, 14, 15. And now we come to the second of those 10 subdivisions, which is the path remembering bodhicitta. And Rinpoche was saying it is quite important to actually make an effort to remember bodhicitta. And how you do that, it is very important to generate all the conditions that are conducive for allowing you to remember bodhicitta, and to do whatever you can in order to place imprints of bodhicitta in your mind. Of course, the more you cherish in yourself, the less you will have an opportunity to place imprints of bodhicitta in your mind. So the key to all this is to always remember others, to remember the importance of others, and to hold others as supreme in comparison to yourself. That will allow you to place some imprints of bodhicitta in your mind. And as you can see, there are 5 divisions in that, but one of the ways of making sure that you have conditions that are conducive for the developing and the remembrance of bodhicitta is to actually always have the aspiration to be ordained. How this is because if you look at the lifestyle of lay people, you will see how difficult it is for them to practice, how many faults of the 3 doors can occur, and all these act as obstacles for the generation of bodhicitta. Once you become ordained, actually you're much more protected, and it is easier to generate the mind of bodhicitta. So one of the main aims here is to always have this aspiration to be ordained. So we look at verse number 16, aspiration to remember previous births and to be ordained. May I practice the contact of enlightenment. May I remember past births in all migrations and in all successive lives, at death, transference and birth. May I always be ordained. So first of all, we look at this word enlightenment. May I practice the contact of enlightenment. And when we talk about enlightenment, we say that enlightenment is this particular state that is characterized by the full development of all positive qualities, a state that is very precious because all negativity and all faults have been eliminated. So it is important that one, straight from the beginning of the path, engages in a type of contact that will lead to that particular state. When we talk about enlightenment, of course, we can talk about enlightenment on 3 levels, enlightenment on 3 vehicles, but it is only the enlightenment of the great vehicle that describes the precious state of Buddhahood. And this, we need to follow the type of contact that will lead us there. It is therefore quite important that at all times we contemplate the faults and the shortcomings that accompany the lifestyle of a lay person, and rather at all times have this aspiration, strong aspiration, to be ordained and practice this contact as an ordained person.
지금 더럽된 영화 영어를 써서 제디 가르쳐 보지 말아. 어디 저디 장주 선배 뭐라면 답이야디 가르르세나. 지금 장주 선배 전부 땡진 매와 말이 장주 선배 전부 땡진 요아리디 장주 선배 전부 땡진도서 지금 사톱니마도 요구와 말이와 사토바이나 어디더니 지금 섬진 것 동안도 지금 전부 땡라 말아 장주 선배 말 쇼반제나 지금 먹이 지나는 지금 루지 섬다 어다 ngọc 조디 지금 dom보디 전부 땡라 영마라디 원진로 지토고 요아리다 지금 원진지 토고 요아리 마다 지금 가르치고 전부 땡라 니디디나 다 전부 랍드 정의 땡고 장주 선배만 정란바다 요란비 냠네 지하다 어다 전부 리카도 말 하장고 지금 라마다 마부지 와인도 어디 다딘 가르치싱이 모아인도 디찬이다 랍드 정화 영어를 써서는 모나다자가 인딩.
Now, the reason why ordination, the importance of ordinations is stressed here is because you will understand this if you keep in mind that we are dealing here with practices of beings who are still on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. We're not saying that it is impossible to generate the mind of bodhicitta on the basis of a lay practitioner. We're not saying that those who generate bodhicitta are only those who are ordained. But what we're saying is that if you are still a beginner on the path, if you're still dealing with practices of accumulation and preparation, and on top of that you have the responsibilities and the busyness, the activities that come together with the lay life, then you would have much more obstacles, much more difficulty in generating this the mind of bodhicitta and engaging in these particular practices. So for that reason it is said, whilst I'm still on the path of accumulation, on the path of preparation, things would be much easier if I were ordained. And this is why this aspiration is there very strong. It is, of course, quite possible that a lay person, once they enter the grounds, which means the Arya grounds, they can very well continue their practice as a lay person, because from the point where you attain the first ground, where you become an Arya, you have very good control over your mind, over your body, your speech and your mind. And from that point onwards there will not be many obstacles. But prior to that point it will be easier to do those practices as ordained, as having the vows of ordination. So this is why this particular prayer, this aspiration, appears in this part of the text.
Oji dati na yinba yandu, oji dati jiga shangchib sanpa tsawjurwa namji sarab tamji to rabdi shangwara moya di shangchib ji sanpa jiba da jit tambo yindingi, dati chab sanpa ji. Dati ni niwa di oji da shangchib sanpa tsawjurwa kamni tsatam manyambara oji momba molam di yinba yandu dati dana tsawa na yaba kanji jizo lobjir di sambu choba angso tsawji tsatam choba tami yawanta wa tokta manyi chomi chobar chawa sena songwa yandu oji da jiga tu samji da rango tu samji geba tsaba soba di oji da jiga jeba kanji mara jizo lobar jirwa la mugir shi di oji da jiga shangju samba saujo la shubha namji da zambu shubha sidu na jiga da yandong dongnir jiga lu sanding jiga shangju ji oji da jiga samjeya la jiga tanchen anza zaba jiga ten tanchen anza zaba la chachen di ten di oji rabdi shangwa ten yana rabdi shangwa ten dang di ten ni shangju ji mara shangju ji sam jeba la dambu mo sam tenin jik sam go goni shangju ji sam zang go yuwa rin jik dam si ji oda shangju sam bi damba shiwa yana ji nishu damba tsarum giwa juda ji tsarum samje dong shi ji tsarum di tsarum namba sam la saba oji da rabdi shangwa ten la jiga kyonji ma guwa tanchen rawon zomgui mambu jing zomgui yuwa rin odan chenpa ten la yang ting garchen mambu ji yuwa yendu tenra meba tsarum sam sangwa la jiga kyonji ma guwa dhamma meba yang su drapa oda kyon meba tenra da molam kyon nama yinba ji.
So, as you can see, we're at the part of the text that is dealing with generating a path that always remembers bodhicitta. And in order to do that, we need to have a number of conditions or causes to allow us to do that. And the first one is to have this aspiration to be ordained. The second one appears in the second subdivision of that, which says aspiration not to allow the deterioration of ethics. So having pure ethics, pure morality acts as a factor that allows us to keep remembering bodhicitta. The root text says, "May I train in the footsteps of all conquerors and thoroughly complete the noble conduct. May I always practice non-deteriorated and faultless, stainless, thoroughly pure and moral contact." So again, we are still within the bounds of the practices of the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. And as we have said, it is quite important and it's quite convenient in a way to do those practices on the basis of ordination rather than on the basis of the lay practitioner. So you can see that an ordained person, on the basis of the vows of ordination that they hold, they can take the bodhisattva vows and they can go through the stages of the aspiring bodhicitta as well as the engaging bodhicitta. this is done always with the intention of seeking to establish the well-being, the welfare of other sentient beings. So it is important in order to progress, to get any closer to establishing that, to be able to maintain and increase one's virtue. And once one assumes the Bodhisattva vows, one can practice in a way where the three types of moralities will remain pure, unaffected, without any stains of deterioration. And the three types of morality that are practiced by bodhisattvas is the morality of stopping actions that are not benefiting others, of accumulating actions which are of the best benefit for others, which is the morality of working for the benefit of sentient beings. And I'm just forgetting the third. Rinpoche sultrim sum karikareres.
Ori dadi lamro dona yuadi nichu dombo tsadum giwa judu ji tsadum simjen dongchi ji tsadum si samsong yuarwa.
The one I was forgetting was the morality of keeping one's vows. Right. So these three types of morality need to be kept in the most pure way. We have a number of words that are stressing this: non-deteriorated, faultless, stainless, thoroughly pure moral contact. It refers to the three types of morality of bodhisattvas.
Wajida dinda yamba yandida de ji jangju sambi wada monsamichi deni maran jiksamichi nan jigdoma seju de jangju sambi ji domba ji tsarum samji de domba longwa de wada jangju ji samji bada jin je niwa yinding da da ji je tambo da je niwa ni to wada deni dan din sam deni to di jang na yang to da disu chimborang ma de to chili ni ri wana den punan.
Right, so we as you see, this second, verse number 17, which is the second subdivision of that, is the aspiration not to allow this deterioration of ethics. And if one assumes the bodhisattva vows, one needs to, of course, hold all the commitments that are related to engaging bodhicitta as well, aspiring as well as engaging bodhicitta, and keep these vows, this moral contact in the purest way. This keeping pure morality is the second cause that allows one to remember bodhicitta. The first cause was presented on verse 16, which was to always have the aspiration to be ordained. We will actually stop the presentation of the text here for tonight, and there's actually very little time for questions and answers. Rinpoche said maybe one or maybe two questions, so I'll have you fight over it. Who's going to ask it? Okay, I see someone very eager there.
With all the countless sentient beings and the eons and eons and eons of rebirth, is there ever a time where all of us, or the last of us, will become enlightened, or the end of samsara? Is there?
So there was a question like, given that sentient beings are countless, and given that there are eons and countless rebirth after rebirth, will there ever be a time where samsara will be emptied? Will there ever be a time where even the last sentient being will reach enlightenment? Is that your question? 탐제 여러 샘젠디 처음에 봐요레스 아 그래서 샘젠 레레기다 다 개와 야나 양도 랭도사 디 걸어서야 디 걸어다 동베기 가린 걸어와 조에기 두세 여러웨스 다 샘젠 타마디 찬주기 고방 가디 토기레스 디 영세기레스
어디다 년진 코은 타유아 리스기와로 어디다 코은 타유 메시지 되지다 세상에 통이지 연구요아리 양지 어디 그와도 좀 말되는 상황고요아리 남긴 달도 지라지단 semje malun tang dejen de se namka sejidin ta yuwa marwa de naje semje ko ta mi song yuari oji da de mena semje tamji sangje ga disoji yuwa arizina de yugu yuarwa de yendu semje jigda malwa sangji du na jidan ta yu se khilen go re de dison de chiri se to ya mingi yamba yendu de la shibcha shin de ji ko oji karse go da samchen re samchen jeong go samchen jin korban ta mes samchen shirawa gon korban ta yos samchen re ne sang ji go korban ta ro se ba re wa ma ta de de da ji ga sang yo re.
Now, it is of course a very interesting question, but I'll give you the punchline at the end. I'll give you in the beginning that, of course, we have to accept that there is an end to samsara. We have to accept that. Now, first of all, let's look at this statement. Countless sentient beings, right? It is said that the limit of sentient beings is equal to the limit of space, and we know that there is no limit to space, which means that sentient beings are limitless. Nevertheless, each one of those sentient beings possesses the potential to reach enlightenment, and each one of them at one particular time will reach the state of enlightenment. So at one time or another, samsara eventually will be emptied. We will come to the end of samsara, but as for giving you the actual particular time, that will be a bit more difficult. Now, when this question is asked, it's very helpful to look at it from this way. When we talk about samsara, you can talk about the general samsara, and you can talk about the individual samsara that each one of us is experiencing. And of course, definitely there will be an end to this individual, to this particular samsara, because individually each one of us will reach the state of enlightenment. But when we talk about the general samsara, that's a bit more difficult to define. Yeah?
이거 정강가세 상지하고 디수지 연두 삼전 시작하고 그 타민타요스 탕민타미스 삼전 들어지는 코란코라리스지 다만 이어 정가세한다 메딩이 임바연두 탕만들이스지 탕민타자니미스.
Now, it is interesting also to make this distinction between, let's say, the personal samsara and the general samsara, right? Because although we can see an end and we can posit the end for one individual, what will be the time where they will finish with the samsara? Because they are endless individuals, it is very difficult to posit the limit of samsara for everyone, right? The general samsara.
But it's unknown, really, that there is an end to I'm talking about the general, because the idea isn't it to keep returning until the last of us make it through, or make it to the enlightenment.
You mean for bodhisattvas to keep returning until the last one is enlightened? So, according...
Is so... I know he doesn't know the end, but is thought to be an end.
Rinpoche la de chi korwa tena la tuai na chi korwa ki ta mu di dinre yorwa sa karzana ta chirdan ta chanchu ki semba ina ta senjen thama korwa madde ki pardu koronso yana yandu kewa lengire sa senjen thama ki chedu ta koronso senjen thama tena la roba che ki chedu koso yandu kewa lengire sa.
Orida samchen tamasina ta karsigo samchen shitawa rini tan tandawo zagaji yuwa mata di yang samchen kongan ngumari ta taman de chuna ludi yuwa sije ta zaya se yang to di ko wen yuwa.
Rinpoche says, actually, you know what is the problem? Although we say that each individual sentient being at one particular time would be liberated from samsara, it's very difficult to give them numbers, right? So this will be the first, to say that this will be the first, this will be the second, and that this one will be the last one to get out of samsara. So that becomes a bit, we cannot define the order, right? And we cannot find which will be the last one to get out of samsara. But each one will get out. Just stay with this statement that if we're talking about individual samsara has an end. For each one individually, there will be a time where we get out. Well, apparently I missed the point here that Rinpoche apparently said that if there is an end to the individual samsara, from that you have to infer that there is an end to the general samsara. One more.
So maybe a little closer. What are the signs of a lay person reaching the first grounds of the path?
Kimbeki ten kavla ta sa thambo tobye ki karen karla gore tam indawa kare kare yoresa. Kimbachi ki sa thambo phakbe kimbachi ki the phakbe sa tobye ki tam indawa kare kare yoresa.
Ori dan kimbachi ki senanda sa thambo tobyala ki sa seje de sa toba dang ji phaklam toba shangju sembe phaklam toba thonglam toba to so tinya ba yin gi waro. Waji tombanya toba zamdo ma zi tombanya muk zing thongwa na jing ko tombanya ngosam de mara nili tar de muk zing thongwa na jing ji ta yong wa yin na deni sa tombo le bari thonglam tobari waji da ji da ta manda wa yang gi wa shidang nang ko ta manda wa ma bu yang gi wa.
Arati was saying, when we talk about a being, an individual reaching their first ground, when the first ground is reached, at the same time one attains the path of seeing, which is the Arya path. Now, whether you are an ordained person or whether you are a lay person, the type of realization is exactly the same. Because when you reach the Arya path, you can actually directly, perceptually perceive emptiness, as if it was an external object that you could perceive with your own eyes. And there are a number of signs, some of them are internal and some of them are external, that will accompany this experience. But the level of realization is the same for everyone who reaches that point. Actually, in the text, Umala Chupa entering into the middle way, we have a description of exactly what is happening in each one of the grounds. And in the first ground, everything happens in hundreds. So, for example, it says the individual will be able to meet with 100 Buddhas and receive teachings from those 100 Buddhas and so forth. There's a list of things that occur at this level. There's one more.
I'm in doubt about the line that says here that's translated, may I remember past births and all migrations. The past is in parentheses. In the text this is Droa Kundu Kewa Dengir Chik. Why would it hasn't seemed to be linked the remembrance, if it's talking about remembrance of past rebirths, why that's an important factor in not forgetting bodhicitta, or does it have a different meaning that not to forget the generation of bodhicitta in the past? What exactly is the connection?
The chanchugi sem majeve lam ki kavla tambo melam tambo tena la kewa ngoma chemba tang raptu chungwa chemba ni yores kewa ngoma chemba ki jumsen kare yoresa kewa ngoma di chanchugi sem keya ki ta nyamlen che ki tremba dirweza jumsen kare resa
ori da de gen bi waro dan de jangju samban chojuru ka se ba yendu chojuru yene jangju ji sam jela ki di waro ki di wari di jangju ji sam jela ki ne yang ji jangju ji wa ngama di jela jangju ji sam ki di yona te maten ji yang gu waro.
Right, so remember that we're talking about a bodhisattva, a practitioner who's on the path of accumulation or preparation. It means he's already bodhisattva, he has already generated the mind of bodhicitta, so he's remembering the previous life in which he did it.
That particular life in which he generated it and the lives that he practiced it?
Sometimes you don't remember that you generated it.
So to remember that you did generate it in the past. Thank you.
What you've been at, you did that on your viewer. Because Lobron Power, Shuadi, what you done, Mobile Yapsigo, you Homa, she's a Homa Jiri. Tombo Gona, Lobron Tayons, and the Chua Matawa, marji kwa ketok jenji endingi oji da di lobon papa la da arian diwa de mar soba ju ji warwa oji de yo ji jiwa ngama ji ga changjum chod sam che jang ji yin gyo sar de da de ji tomo no to da tomo mai ba ni wari kan tar ja ji kan zo chu tab ko yi wari de oji nam sina di ngama changjum ji sam che ja ga di jeni ten da teni temban do su oji da tira yo ji warwa.
And there are actually, certain, you can find in biographies of, certain bodhisattvas or, different beings, how they remembered that they had generated the mind of bodhicitta in a previous life and so forth. And Rinpoche was giving the example here of the great master Arya Deva, who had, because Rinpoche says there are two cases, you can generate the mind of bodhicitta and you can remember it, or you can generate it and there can be some sort of, you forget about it. But then, he says, Rinpoche was saying how the great master Arya Deva actually came to the point where he remembered what he had done in his previous life with regards to bodhicitta.
Worried that